Frank's Red Hot is the perfect blend of flavor and heat, so you can use an entire bottle to make recipes like buffalo chicken dip or buffalo nachos, or even things that don't start with buffalo. Frank's Red Hot, I put that on everything.
Craig, are you ready?
Hold on. I started a trend. I started a trend on Thursday. So here we go. The podcast is tipped, and there we are, totally unprepared for the next 90 minutes. You're listening to this, and no one knows why the hell you chose that, but here it goes. And welcome to episode 10 minus the extra episode that we did, the emergency one, episode 10 of podcast versus
That was
everyone.
fantastic.
I am world-renowned singer Craig Powers, and with me, as always, is probably also an amazing singer, Jeff Nusser.
I am not an amazing singer, but I am an amazing One Shining Moment fan. So you really just made my night because I love that song. I learned maybe it was last year, the year before, but I learned that there are actually people who don't like that. And I thought like what must be wrong with a person if they don't like One Shining Moment?
Dude, every year after the championship game, you sit there and you wait.
It's like the best
And
part.
you wait, and then you get all your throat gets all back. You get a frog in your throat while you're watching it,
and it gets dusty.
And remember the year that they had someone else, was it, I don't know, Jennifer something, sing it?
Yeah,
and people got
that was a travesty.
So mad that they had to go back to the Luther Vandross
100%
original because it's better. It's supposed to be cheesy. Like, it's supposed to be cheesy. It's not.
Of course it is.
Who cares that, like, why do we gotta try to be cool with everything?
Yeah, no, what makes it awesome is how cheesy it is. Like, that's what makes it great. I don't know. Like, yeah. I feel like the I actually hate One Shining Moment is like the epitome of like internet counter intellectualism, whatever. Like, it's just like I'm gonna say it sucks because everybody else loves it and
Right.
It actually sucks. It's like, no, it doesn't suck. You suck. You're a moron.
Well, as you guys can tell, based on Jeff's strong opinions, Jeff's been drinking.
I'm one pint deep on this sucker already.
So, Jeff, what have you been drinking while you've been waiting me to get ready for this?
Yeah, so I'm 1 pint deep on my Skookum crowler of Pile Up, which is an IPA, and it's a little hazy, but it's kind of a darker hazy. So it's got kind of some of those like kind of piney regular West Coast IPA notes, but it's also very, very fruity, almost like a pineapple-y mango almost kind of flavor. So Untapped tells me it is made with Mosaic, Amarillo, Nelson, Chinooks, and S Passion or South Passion.
Southern
hops.
Passion.
So Southern Passion. So there you go, hops. And now I'm also looking at Untapped, and it's telling me that there are hints of tangerine and stone fruit, which actually is what I'm tasting. So, yeah, do we decide on a new rating scale?
Man, we haven't. So we did get a suggestion from Brian Anderson, our colleague, to do 99 beers and rate them, but I'm sure as hell I'm not putting that much effort into that. I'm definitely not doing that.
Yeah,
that would require note taking, a spreadsheet.
Okay. All right. Well, how about this? I will rate it 4 out of 5 One Shining Moments. How about that?
Oh, okay, yes. We'll make up one on the fly each time. Jeff, I'm very proud of you, I have to say. Those tasting notes were just, they were deep. They were talking about intellectualism right there.
I'm learning.
Your palate is so refined. It's not like, I don't know, it's an IPA, whatever. But man, I'm so proud of you. Tears happening over here.
I think I also taste things better now because I'm not having a beer like every night
Oh yeah.
So I think that also helps. But anyway, continue. What are you drinking?
I am having this weekend we went down to Portland to visit a friend. Um, and I did my lovely baby mama and daughter went on Sunday and bounced around to multiple, and then I also had Monday, because the nice part about working from home is that you can work from wherever the hell you want. And so I bounced around on Sunday, took the kiddo with me, so I made a nice list of breweries to go to. We did a nice brewery tour and taproom tour. And then on Monday, while I was working, I stopped by the new Modern Times location in Portland.
Oh,
It's on Belmont. There's a lot of breweries around there. It's actually in the location where Commons Brewery used to exist, if any of our readers are familiar with that. It's a great spot. It was a beautiful space when Commons was there, and Modern Times took their kind of funkiness to it. So if you've ever been to their satellite location in San Diego, they have a brewery location and kind of satellite, which is not a brewery, it's just a bar. That one, the bar is made up entirely of old VHS tapes with the covers on them. So at this one, the bar was made up entirely of floppy disks of various colors, and there was just also just a very kind of like 80s grandparents' house mystique to it. But I wanted to get something to bring back just to talk about my Portland. I got two Portland beers actually. I'll probably talk about the other one midway through the podcast, so stick around for that. Um, but this particular one is by Modern Times, of course, in a collaboration with a brewery called J. Wakefield, which I've mentioned briefly before on the podcast if you've listened to every episode. Modern Times is interesting, very interesting brewery. They are entirely employee owned. They converted to that about 3 years ago. So while you see a lot of breweries of their size and growth would sell out to a larger, because they started building secondary locations. They've built one in LA and one in Portland now. And I think they have, eyes on more, and they have two in San Diego. So when you see breweries do that, typically you're like, okay, they're getting prepared to sell. Because you saw that with Elysian, you saw that with Wicked Weed, they're just and 10 Barrel. They were just building up assets to be more a place that can be more attractive to a buyer, because they really like, especially Anheuser-Busch, they really like buying breweries that have those satellite restaurants and things like that. But Modern Times, they, instead of doing that, which I think I anticipated them selling out, but they instead converted to employee owned. And for many years, their two locations in San Diego don't serve food. But for many years, it said on their cans and their bottles, it would always say, "This beer is vegan." And I always thought it was a kind of a joke. There are non-vegan beers. It's obviously if you use lactose in your beer or any other animal product, but it's typically the milk stouts and stuff or the cream ales that aren't vegan. But most beer is vegan because it's usually just plants and yeast and water so I thought it was a joke. But it turns out when they opened their places in Los Angeles and Portland, they both have restaurants. They're restaurants, and sure enough, they're vegan restaurants. So they very much are actually a vegan brewery.
they're
So
committed to that.
they're very committed. So, like the burgers there, the Beyond Burger. I had every intention of going there. I've never tried a Beyond Burger, Impossible Burger, anything like that, because when it's next to a real burger on the menu, I'm like, no thanks. But we were at another brewery, which I'll mention later because I have another beer from them called Wayfinder on Sunday night. We were going to meet our friend at Modern Times for dinner. She's a vegetarian, so she was down, but we were at Wayfinder and we got a table. Interesting story about that. We walked in. There was a lot of people. It was beautiful day on Sunday in Portland, 75 degrees, whatever. And they had, the deck was full, and there was a sign that said the deck, to see a host for deck seating. Okay, so we're like, okay, so if we go inside, we don't have to see a host. So we go inside, we spot a booth, and we're like, okay, with a kid, the booth is always nice. You got a lot of space, and they're confined and everything. But the host comes over and he's like, "Oh, sorry, I was saving this table for someone, but I'll go see what I can do." And so we walk over to the back of the host table, and he just goes, "You know what? I'll just make them wait. You have the kid with you. You can have the booth." This is like a booth that could probably sit 6 people, and it's just like we have one person coming, so it's like 3 adults and a kid. And so we kind of felt bad, but I was like, hey, that worked out. But anyway, so we didn't end up going to Modern Times for dinner, but I did go there the next day for lunch, and I did grab this beer. It's called Suggestion of Mass. It's a collaboration with Jay Wakefield. It's a big imperial stout, 11% and not barreled. It's just a regular imperial stout with a lot of coffee and coconut and a little bit of vanilla. So it kind of ventures into that pastry stout realm, but it's not super sweet. It's pretty sweet, but not super sweet. Jay Wakefield is pretty famous for making these big adjunct-laden stouts. They're out of Florida. Jay Wakefield is the name of the brewer. He got famous as a home brewer, and to the point where people were like trading for his homebrew beer. And then he started his brewery, and now you'll see his more sought after barrel aged stuff goes, $500, $600 secondary on the market, sometimes even more depending on how rare, pushing up to 1,000. He does a lot of collabs. Obviously, this was one. I wouldn't be surprised if some of this ended up in barrels too. But so it's a big unbarreled stout. Now this is the second time within, I don't know, 3 weeks that I've had a big ass pastry stout type stout. And to be honest, that's not my favorite style. There's this kind of, and this beer has it too, with a lot of unbarreled stouts. There's this kind of aftertaste to it and a little harshness to it when they get this big, this 11, 12%, that the barrel tends to temper and kind of even off. The barrel just kind of finishes edges off. And this one is great nose. The coffee certainly dominates. I looked at the date on this can. It's from September, so I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the coconut has faded at this point, faded away into the background. But it's got a great coffee nose, and definitely a sweet nose. It's very thick. It's got a lot of chocolate, a lot of coffee, little hints of coconut and vanilla. You especially get the kind of roastiness from the coconut. And that's kind of what I really like. It's good when you can taste the coconut, but I really like kind of when you use toasted coconut, it kind of adds to the toastedness of the malts you're using, and it kind of gives this deeper depth of that roastiness. And this definitely has that. It definitely has that kind of almost soy saucy finish to it, where it's like, man, if this was in a barrel, that would be shaved off, and this beer would be, probably pretty damn tasty, aged in a bourbon barrel for 12 months or so. But yeah, overall, it's like if you're just thinking purely on an imperial stout style, I think this is very good. I probably, if we're just gonna go integers again, probably also go with 4 shining moments out of 5. So I'm definitely enjoying this. As it says, 11%. Still on that diet. Still hit me, but I got my sidecar beer again, so which I'll be happy to talk about later. But,
So we'll take a break and revisit later.
Yeah. Modern Times, if you're ever down there in Portland, it's a cool place, or in San Diego or in Los Angeles. This particular one was brewed at their Los Angeles facility. They actually brew at all 3 facilities. So, and they talk about how like they said, they'll brew the same batches in Portland and they'll taste a little different because of the water profile. Some of them they like better. Some of their old recipes they like better brewed in Portland. So maybe part of the reason Portland's such a popular beer town is because of the water. Who knows? We know that's why Olympia was so good, but that's an old reference.
Yeah.
But now it's like hipster cans. Mostly just in Olympia though. Like you don't really see the Olympia cans many other places.
No, you don't. I wondered if you had gone down to Portland because I saw you check into a Great Notion beer, and
I did go to Great
yeah,
Notion,
I
yeah, but
love Great Notion.
yeah, I didn't bring any of theirs
Did
back.
you did you have a pancake, a maple syrup pancake?
No,
Oh,
no, I tried a few others. I've had that one plenty of times. Yeah, they have a beer called Double Stack, which is the most maple syrup intense beer I've ever tasted and smelled in my entire life. It just fills, I know you've had it too, Jeff. It just
yeah,
fills the house with,
it's as good
and
as you imagine.
yeah, yeah. But like I said, those big unbarreled stouts are not my thing as much anymore.
Yeah,
So, but actually they had, I tried the thing that I think, some Great Notion does a lot of ridiculous stuff.
yeah,
Um, they they've gotten really famous for that, but I think they do execute the New England style hazy IPA really well as anyone in the Northwest. So I had a really nice. So they make a beer called Ripe, which is made with the same yeast strain that Heady Topper is made with, and then this was a double dry hop version, so that usually just gives it a different body and a lot more aroma, and it was very tasty. And then I also had one that they collaborated with a brewery. I can't remember which one in California. It might have been Moxa, or that's Moxa Coffee. So I can't remember the brewery. It sounds like that. It's Sacramento, but whatever. So it was called Barrel Aged Vanilla Limousine. And if you know anything about how Great Notion adjuncts their beers, man, that thing was vanillaed up. And I imagine that the unbarreled one was even more, but the barrel aged one, it kind of tempered it, and it tasted just like freaking chocolate milk, man. And we got some ice cream for B, and we dumped some of the ice cream in the last few ounces and made a little float, and it was super tasty.
yeah,
There was so much vanilla in that beer. Yeah, it worked really well. Like I really enjoyed that one. Got a small pour, but that's all you
yeah,
needed. It was a 5 ounce pour. That's all
yeah.
you needed, something like that. But yeah,
It's
yeah. When we got some cans of another double dry hopped IPA that they had available. They had the blueberry muffin cans available, but I
yes,
it's good, but I just didn't feel like buying it. I
yeah.
got some can beer.
That's the one
Yeah.
I was actually just gonna throw in on because I was like, I haven't been down there in a couple of years to Great Notion, so I was
Oh
like,
yeah,
I
they
didn't.
actually have a second location now. That's where we went.
Oh,
And that,
nice.
so their original system is only 7 barrels.
Yeah,
I guess I should have
yeah. It
brought
wasn't a very big
here
place.
because we could have talked about that. But this new one is 30 barrels, and so now it's pretty. Before it was like really hard to get their beer. Like they'd have a really super strict limit on like one or two crowlers you could get. But now they have like tons of and they have cans, and they usually have a few different beers and cans that you can buy as much as you want of, and
Yeah,
so it's stiff. But it's like $20 4 packs. So how much do you
yeah, yeah.
buy? Um, but
That's
yeah,
cool
so
though because I remember when I was down there, I muled back some stuff for you, and they were like, yeah, you can only get two of. I don't even remember what it was, but it was like they would only let me get two of whatever it was, and I was like, oh, okay. And so I brought back some crowlers, but I do remember that the blueberry muffin was sort of my favorite. That was so good. Tasted oddly enough just like a blueberry muffin.
yeah, that's when Great Notion like wants to make a beer, they call it something like it tastes like that.
It tastes just like it,
Amanda had an
which
orange
is pretty
creamsicle.
incredible.
Amanda had an orange creamsicle IPA, and
Oh,
she had another sour that was I can't remember. It was a bunch of fruit and like vanilla in it,
yeah.
like crazy.
I
Uh,
want that IPA.
yeah,
I got to
but
get
yeah.
one.
So Great Notion. I went to Great Notion. I went to Wayfinder. I went to
Yeah.
Upright right before Great Notion. Upright and Great Notion cannot be more different in their execution. Upright makes a lot of really clean pilsners and really subtle, well-balanced sours. With like really subtle and so it was kind of a funny contrast to go from one to the other, which Great Notion, there is nothing subtle about anything they do.
No.
Um, so that's why they're a bit, they can be a bit polarizing among beer nerds because of that. I'm kind of like I like some of what they do, some of it is just not for me.
Well,
The
like
minute
there's a time and a place for everything,
yeah,
right? Like that's what's awesome about, the beer scene, is that it's like, if you like a certain thing, you can have some of that thing. If you like variety, like to try different things, you can try different things. And I love like experimental places that will just, try something different.
Right.
But there's also a place for places that don't experiment and just, do what they do really well. And, that's definitely cool too. It's, there's really no limit to what you can enjoy, which I think is what's sort of super fun about beer, as opposed to like, and this is not to like knock people who really like wine, but it's like, wines are pretty standard, you're in a certain style, you might get, slightly different notes, but for the most part, you kind of know what you're getting, and it's just sort of a quality thing. With beer, it's like, there really is kind of no limit to the kinds of things you can do. And you can really try a whole lot of different things and appreciate each of them for what they are.
Right, exactly. But I think your order of operations there and which brewery you're going to and trying is definitely going to help you enjoy those beers better.
Yeah, that's
Great
true.
Notion. You've got to make sure if you're going to Great Notion, you're either going to go get a Pilsner afterwards to cleanse your palate, or you're just going to be done drinking after that.
Yeah. You need something a little lighter, a little cleaner, a little crisper to kind of clean it off there.
Yeah, and that's what we did. We went over to Belmont Station, one of the better beer bar / beer stores in the country, and I actually we had like just some like Pilsner-y type beers. I had a segment ever, but I was able to get I may have talked before about Drie Fonteinen, which is my favorite, which means three fountains in Dutch. It's one of my favorite. It's my favorite lambic brewery. And they had some on the shelf at Belmont, and they make some of their lambics they'll add honey to, and when they do that, there's a little bee on the label. And as my daughter is named Bee, we pretty much hunt for everything with bees on it. So they had their creek with honey, and so they all had little bees on the label. So I bought like 3 bottles of it. I'm like, I need these.
Yeah.
So I was really excited. It was all around great beer trip to Portland as usual. I hit up a handful of breweries and one of my favorite beer stores. So all around good, and cheers to my wonderful partner who went along with it all.
She is pretty amazing to put up with you.
Yeah. And cheers to my daughter.
We're both pretty lucky.
My daughter who skipped many naps so that Dad could enjoy his beer. So, yeah. But yeah, so this is, as to use your word, ostensibly a WSU podcast. So I guess we can talk about
more or less.
So we thought we were going to be done talking about basketball, but now we had a basketball only podcast last Thursday, which I know a lot of you listened to.
Yeah.
And I hope you found us then and have come around now, and now you're wondering why the hell they aren't talking about the Cougs. But anyway, so I guess, for the first time, I'll actually happily lead off with basketball. Jeff, let's first talk about some comments Pat Chun made today. The Cougs in 60 podcast. You have studied them a little more than me, so I know he was kind of talking about Ernie not being about as negative as you would see an athletic director be about a past coach.
Yeah.
I think part of that, a little bit, he wasn't the guy who hired him, and he was stuck with the bill essentially. And
no pun intended.
No pun intended. And so what stood out to you from that podcast today?
Yeah, that was really the big thing, was that he was sort of frank and direct and really, he wasn't as like scathing as I guess he could have been. Like, if you're thinking like, okay, what could you say that would absolutely just sort of burn it to the ground with, as far as the previous coach went. But it also was sort of like, it was clear that he was like, Ernie Kent did not do his job well, and we have fired him because of that, and we will do better. It was just sort of like,
right.
And he made a lot of it's, there's as much in what someone doesn't say as what they do say, right? Or what they allude to without necessarily specifically making a direct comment about. And so, he was on there for about 10 minutes. He made one nice comment about Ernie, and it was like the first comment. And even that was like really backhanded. It was like,
Right.
I don't have the quote in front of me right this second. Hold on. But it just was sort of like,
I'll find it for
Ernie has done a great job off the court. Okay, so great, right? Like I really, and that was something that Ernie always, hung his hat on, right? Was that my players graduate even though like most of them transfer and whatever. But anyway, he said, Ernie has done a great job off the court. I really enjoyed what he did to try and develop young people. But the challenge, what was going on, wasn't showing dividends on the basketball court, and our guys want to win. And so, like, the word try, I'm just like, oh my God, like that is so backhanded, right? Like I appreciate his effort, even though the effort was not, good enough. But anyway, it's,
Right.
so there was that. And then the rest of it was really just a lot of, referencing sort of all of the forces that converged, that he felt like really forced him to make the move. The biggest one being, we all have sort of focused on the contract, right? The contract, it's too much, and they can't possibly afford this. And basically what he said was, which is kind of what we suspected as we talked about this last week, was that, there's a cost to not firing him, right? And Chun used those exact words. He said that, the cost of inaction was greater than the cost of action. And a lot of that had to do with, tickets. He talked about ticket sales. He talked about apathy on the campus among students. And sort of embedded in that, which I thought was actually really smart, was this understanding that, making hardcore fans out of students is what eventually pays off down the line in donations. At least that was the connection I made, because he talked about needing to get freshmen in particular into these games and enjoying these games and really sort of, basically building a habit out of going to these games, whether it's, football or volleyball or soccer or basketball. And so, that was something that I found sort of really interesting. So he talked about apathy, and then he just talked about, the fact that these students, the players, are only on campus for a short amount of time, and WSU owed it to them to give them a better coach, which again was sort of like, holy hell, this is really like blatant and transparent and not at all coded. Like normally athletic directors go for sort of the coded, criticisms. And this was not coded at all. This was very direct and very matter of fact. And, really sort of when he started talking about what he was looking for in the next coach, I think that also really highlighted, what it was that he felt like was lacking under Ernie.
Yeah. To go back to to his students' point, if you think about it, there's a nice example from the basketball side of the carryover to when Ken Bone was the coach from the Tony Bennett era, where students were still going to the game and there was actually really good student attendance. And then there's a lot of people my age who went to school during Tony Bennett and Dick Bennett era who are deeply invested in the basketball team. And they have, and I've seen a lot of them and I've seen a lot of them kind of lose apathy, and a lot of them just straight up follow Tony Bennett still at Virginia. But it's hard to follow. And a lot of I knew a lot of people that didn't know much about basketball, so they thought it's funny. You would have friends that we do the NCAA pools, which we'll talk about that in a little bit, but you'd see them when you have to pick the final score as a tiebreaker, and their scores would be like 52-50 or whatever. I'm like, yeah, you watch too much Bennett ball. But yeah. So, but then you look at the other example from football, from the Wolf years. There's a huge gap, and it's even there's a tradition that started during the Wolf years that I think it took till this year to kind of hedge a bit was leaving at halftime. Like the
Yeah.
students would just straight, even if it was like I saw games that were not in doubt. They were definitely still in doubt. We're playing a Pac-12 team, and students would just bail at halftime. Like the weather be okay, whatever, and they just bail. And because that was a tradition that started, the football game itself wasn't that important, like the outcome, because they were trained to like not really give a crap about the outcome because like it was going to be shitty in the second half anyway. And I don't even blame them. Like I'm so glad that
Yep.
I narrowly met. Like I was like I had the Holiday Bowl my freshman year, and then I had the Tread and Water Doba years, and then but God, I can't even imagine if you started school in 2008, and you had 2008, 2012, then Mike Leach's first season, you know, just horrendous football. Like, not even the number of wins, but the style and manner in which they lost. And just because the second half didn't matter when you're losing Paul's very first home game, they lose 66-3. Like, why the hell would you even or game in Pullman because he had a Seattle game first, um, but after that, it's like, well, what the hell are we into? And then there was a 69-0 game that year. There was just a lot of games where they just got down a bunch. I don't like even in the better when the teams were a little bit more competitive towards the end of his reign. They a lot of the games were close because they just threw up some meaningless points at the end. So and nothing was really going to happen. And so it was, it's that Chun's right. Like you build this culture of freshmen and sophomores. They kind of if you can catch them while they're in school, because that student experience at a game is just unmatched. And even now, like I don't even know if I'd want it now. Like I'm too old. I like sitting and all that stuff. But when I was in school, I was the one waiting in line for 5 hours for the football game,
Yeah.
overnight for the UCLA game in 2007. Like I was super into that, and look at what I did. I write for Coug Center. I'm a CAF member. I the first thing I did when I moved back to Washington is uh, put in for season tickets as soon as I could for the football team, and I've often considered buying season tickets for the basketball team, but I just know I'm not going to go to any of the games because it's such because of the winter, the Snoqualmie sucks but
Right.
whatever. But honestly, I'd be more likely to brave Snoqualmie if we had some good teams. So,
Yeah.
but I'm invested in it. I've spent a lot of time on WC basketball, and I definitely donate more money to the CAF because of the experience I had at Martin Stadium and the experience I had in Beasley Coliseum, and um, it's it's definitely a true point. If you want teams invested in sports in your sports program, and truly in a broader connection to the university as a whole can be made through sports, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But it's a great point. I'm glad Sean mentioned that. That was obviously a clear driver for him was the apathy, because he didn't explicitly say it was financial, because he said that it became evident that we had to fire, and so regardless of the buyout or anything. But yeah, there is a financial aspect and we talked about that on Thursday, of firing him because you're losing this money in the future of season ticket holders and
Yep.
donors and just invested fans. So yeah, I think I was impressed that he would say those things. I mean, sorry to like jump on Ernie, but I guess when you're paying the guy 4.2 million not to coach at university anymore, like you don't really have to like pull any punches,
Yeah.
because he got his. I know money's not everything, but I think Ernie, this is honestly better for him not to be coaching this shitty team for like he was taking years off his life, I'm sure. Well, if he was that invested, I don't really know, but
Yeah.
that can't have been fun for him. And now he gets 4.2 million to not deal with that anymore, and WSU can move on. And Jeff, and so on that note, It's very early. We haven't heard any rumors. Right now, it's all speculation. But I kind of want to, and we'll talk about this in future podcasts, because I'm sure this won't happen for a few weeks at least. So, who are you thinking? I know me and you, we've had a lot of discussion about kind of some out of the box coaches and some some targets at smaller schools that we should be looking at. Kind of who are some names early on, beyond kind of some of the like obvious names that probably wouldn't come here anyway. But who are some names early on that you've been looking at, and that I know you have you've developed a full-on crush on one of them. So
Yeah, so I've really got two, and like we talked about, kind of the key here is we feel like we need to look for someone who is not necessarily off the radar, but just sort of like, fills a niche, right? Is doing something that is different and allows the coach to, in particular because of talent, recruit from maybe a slightly different talent pool. To say, okay, I'm looking for a player who fits a specific system, who fits a specific style of play that, in much the same way the Bennett's did, right? Where they could recruit guys who were not necessarily untalented. They recruited guys who were talented. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Look at, the pro careers that some of those guys have had. But guys who fit sort of a very specific mindset, a very specific skill set. And so I feel like any coach that we get, needs to be that way. And I also feel like it needs to lean towards defense. I mean, I guess we could sort of lean towards offense, but it seems like when the Cougars have been successful historically, and I can't speak to anything really sort of pre Kelvin Sampson. Kelvin Sampson was sort of like when I kind of became aware of, WSU basketball. I was in high school at the time. I remember him taking, I think it was 1994, taking a team to the NCAA tournament. I remember my trigonometry teacher was kind enough to put the Cougars game on, I believe it was against BC on the TV. Yeah. So
they totally blew it at the end in that one.
Yes, they did. So, and at the time I was a Husky fan too, so I remember laughing, but we'll just forget about all that. And teacher's name was Mr. Farber. So if Mr. Farber's listening to the podcast, I remember you. All right. So anyway,
he definitely is.
Totally listening. And so, I tend to skew towards defense simply because, that was where, Sampson's teams had success of it being tough, and they weren't necessarily only defensive, but, that was definitely where the emphasis was. And then, obviously the Bennett's, for 6 years, building something out of, players who would seemingly not be necessarily Pac-12 players, but creating a competent Pac-12 team out of these guys. So the two guys I'm looking at, one guy actually, so we're recording this on Tuesday night, and the first four kicked off tonight. One of the things that I actually hate about the NCAA tournament is the first four, but we'll just leave that out because I think it's so stupid. But anyway, if you are going to have a first four, why not have all the 11 seeds play in the first four?
Exactly.
And then let them duke it out and just let the 16s make it to the.
They won. Yeah. Okay.
Anyway,
I'm just gonna add something.
Yeah.
Those teams won their conference tournament. Earn an automatic bid.
Yeah.
Let them be in the actual
let them
tournament.
be in the tournament.
Yeah. Make the teams that like Temple, who probably should have never even been there with an at-large bid.
Yep.
Yeah. Have them duke it out. But anyways,
take the last 8 teams, have them duke it out and whatever, if you got to do it that way. Anyway, one of the 16 seeds was Prairie View A&M. And so we should have a story going up on the site either Wednesday or Thursday, but just sort of looking at some of these coaching candidates that maybe are a little outside the box or outside the consciousness. Prairie View A&M's coach, Byron Smith, is one of those guys. And so if you're not like a huge college basketball fan, probably don't know a whole lot about the Southwestern Athletic Conference. But I guess I can put it this way. It's filled with historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs, right? And, there's really no way to sugarcoat the fact that they suck every year. These are some of like the least funded athletic programs. Their teams are typically pretty terrible. In fact, Prairie View A&M, which played tonight, they had won 20 before tonight, had won 21 of their last 22 games. Well, before that, their first 12 games, they went 1-11 because they played their first 12 games on the road to get paydays. Like, this is what the HBCUs do
Right.
to pay the bills. So anyway, so to have a pretty good SWAC team is actually really rare. Most of their teams are pretty regularly ranked in the 300s and in the Ken Palm rankings. So sort of in the bottom 50, like their 10 teams or 12 teams or whatever it is are usually ranked in the bottom 50 of the national rankings. So, so their team was ranked 206, and this is a guy who's been there for 3 years. He's taken them from 313 all the way to 209 this year, which is actually right ahead or was right ahead of WSU. And one of the things that he does consistently is he has a really good defense, particularly for a SWAC team. And then it's built on creating turnovers. So, for the last really 4 years, starting with the year that he took over kind of as the interim coach halfway through the year, up through this year, they've been among the country's leaders actually in forcing turnovers. So that's the kind of system that maybe you bring a guy in and he can recruit athletes who maybe are a little unrefined offensively, in terms of skill, but are able to really run and jump and just sort of do things lengthwise to disrupt defensively and then create easy buckets going the other way. That's a fun thing. If anybody watched the game tonight, you saw Fairleigh Dickinson make a ton of turnovers, which really allowed them to get out to a big lead. Eventually, they sort of choked it up. Part of that, I think, was due to their offense is kind of sketchy, which is pretty typical for a SWAC team, but that was a thing. And then the other guy, so this guy has become my man crush. Okay. So this is, and this is a name that's actually been floated by, this is not a name, an off the grid name like Byron Smith was with Prairie View A&M. This is a guy who ends up on some of the lists. But I kind of want to make the case that we should really sort of take this one seriously. And this is Russell Turner at UC Irvine. He's been there for 9 years. He's taken them to the tournament twice, including this year. They're a 13 seed, so they play, I don't know, Thursday or Friday. But one of the things that I kind of love about him is that when I look at his defensive metrics, it's very, very pack line-ish. In the way that it's put together. And so in the last 6 years, they have not ranked below 82nd nationally in adjusted defensive efficiency, and that's pretty great for a Big West team. They had a pair of top 50 finishes, which again is really great for a Big West team. And then when you consider this, so in the last 6 years in 2-point percentage defense, here's their national rankings: 1st, 4th, 6th, 4th, 16th, 1st.
Oh.
And so for a team in the Big West, okay, so if you are like me and every time you watch the Cougars just give up another layup and another layup and another fucking layup where it's like no resistance whatsoever, that will change the moment that dude accepts the job. Another thing they do is they actually don't allow a ton of threes, and they're really good at defending the line. So here's their effective field goal percentage, which of course combines the 3-point and 2-point, but 5th, 6th, 9th, 22nd, 2nd, and 21st. So this is a guy who, is really hangs his hat on defense. He's got experience in the NBA as an assistant with the Golden State Warriors. Now this is up to 2010. So this is obviously pre-Steve Kerr, but he was under Mike Montgomery at Golden State. He was also an assistant under Montgomery at Stanford. And we know Montgomery was sort of a defense first kind of guy. So, he's a guy who has a long track record of hanging his hat on defense and being consistently good at sort of one specific thing. And then just sort of the last thing is that over the years, he's had some success recruiting internationally. His last NCAA tournament team back in, 2015? I think is what it was. Yeah, 2015. He had 4 international players, and his 2 best players were international. One from the United Kingdom, another one from Senegal, if anybody remembers, Mamadou Ndiaye. Yeah. I actually watched him play. I was at that game, that opening round game they played against Louisville. I think it was in Portland. And so I was at that game. I mostly remember that because Rick Pitino was like 25 feet onto the court and the refs wouldn't make him get off, which was sort of annoying. But anyway, he was like a 7'5" center from Senegal. So anyway, this is a guy who kind of checks all the boxes. He's recruiting from places that are unusual, and he's got a strong system that he has developed and refined and is committed to and has ridden it to success at a school that hadn't had any success. These are their first 2 tournament appearances, and he's coached them both. So that's my case for Russell Turner at UC Irvine. I know he's going to come up on a lot of these lists just because he's a successful mid-major coach, but I think it goes a little deeper than that, particularly when we compare him to a guy like Travis DeCure. I have no idea how to pronounce that. But the coach at Montana, I mean, he's doing kind of what every Montana coach does. That's a really good mid-major basketball program. So, a guy like that, I just kind of shrug my shoulders. A guy like Turner, I go, yeah, like that kind of checks all the boxes for what WSU needs. So, Craig, who you got?
So I'm just going to talk a little bit about a couple of years. I knew you were going to talk about Russell Turner, so I wasn't going to take that one. But yes, oh my gosh, like you look at his peripheral stats, it's just like, because obviously we don't get to watch a lot of these guys, these teams that much. So we're relying heavily, and you can actually get an insane amount of insight into what a coach does just looking at the trends of their peripheral statistics. And then, Russell Turner, that's a guy I think all of us would just be thrilled to have. To your point on the SWAC, I previewed the MEAC, which is kind of the SWAC's cousin, multiple times for Basketball Prospectus and ESPN. And you talk about, we're writing these previews months before the season starts, and I can guarantee these schools aren't paying their marketing and PR staff to work all year, because the rosters just wouldn't be updated. Emails and calls to their athletic departments just would be unanswered. Like when I'm trying to write a preview for their season, and there's so many transfers and stuff at these small schools, I can't even. So yeah, that's just a kind of a point of how cash strapped these teams are. And yeah, honestly, to build a number 200 team is actually an accomplishment. Like we'll talk about we talk about, Irvine, it's nice when they're top 100, but like seriously, if you're at Prairie View and A&M and you're hitting 200, like that's pretty good. Like the MEAC actually finished as the worst conference this year, which is pretty rare. Usually the SWAC finishes. The MEAC, the best team in the league was Norfolk State, and they are number 256 on KenPom. Every single other team is 300 and above. And so that's what these HBCU schools, people talk about a lot. People think WSU is a hard job. Any of those schools is a hard job.
Oh my God! People have no idea how much harder those HBCU
there
jobs
are plenty of high schools with better resources than some of these college basketball programs.
That's not hyperbole.
Yeah, that's not hyperbole. High schools, junior colleges. There's probably guys transfer from JCs who had better facilities, all this stuff. So keep that in mind when we're looking at you don't just stick to you got to look at the process the guys put in, and that's why we look at the peripherals. I like to click on the conference only stats because that's their peers, and you got to look at how these guys are performing against their peers. So I have a couple, and they're definitely out of the box, and they're highly unlikely. But they're guys that are both, I lived out east for a bit in the Northeast, so maybe I got a little bias for that. But the first is a guy out in Buffalo. It's hard to ignore what Buffalo has done the last 2 years, especially this year. They're 22nd in KenPom. Last year they were 67th, and they got an upset, got to the second round. Nate Oates took over after Bobby Hurley went to Arizona State. He plays an extremely high tempo offense. It's their tempo ranks, adjusted tempo ranks since he's been coach are 27th, 37th, 16th, and 8th this year. Adjusted offense, not so good the first 2 years, 158, 153. The last 2 years, 34 and 20. And then this year he bumped up the defense 29. One thing I liked about the defense, they force some turnovers and they don't let teams shoot threes. And it's just amazing, especially in this day and age, how much the 3-point line drives point production. If you're not letting teams shoot threes, how much that can just make you successful. But yeah, they had the third shortest average offensive possession. See, people thought Ernie was going to be fast, but Ernie never had a fast team like this. Like, Ernie didn't play these high tempo, high pressure defenses, and just from him reading it, like that this is what Buffalo's doing, and that's not a defensive system, but it is a system. They had the second best at limiting assists, so like they're just they're forcing guys to beat them one-on-one and all that. Like they're definitely playing a man-to-man defense, which is big for me, Jeff. I know big for you.
Really, really, really big.
Because it's interesting, they actually had pretty long defensive possessions, 17.9 seconds, 277th on that, but they had 14.4 seconds on their offensive possessions. Long, 17.9 is not super long, but it's not compared to their offense. But yeah, they're good. He has a good 3-point shooting team. Like they shoot threes. I'm also fine with a team that shoots a lot of threes, because that's a pretty easy skill to find in recruiting now. A lot of kids just grow up shooting threes all day, so that's not that hard. I looked at their roster, just kind of look at where the guys are coming from. Not like so one of the things I was impressed, it's not there. There's the biggest transfer was from Houston. He's not playing this year. Yeah, you got a lot of guys that are from Ohio, Florida, Texas, Florida. Definitely a few guys from New York, but he's not just recruiting the Northeast. And they got some. So it's just that we're looking for a style. Obviously, we can do a defensive style, and I think that's what I prefer, and that's what you prefer. But you know what? It'd be if you have a good coach and he coaches to a system. I mean that's the most important thing. And if he's running one of the highest tempo offenses in the country, he knows the type you're looking for. You don't necessarily need those. You don't necessarily need the long guys and whatever. If you're able to grab it out of the net and run, maybe you can find that talent that can do that without necessarily looking for the bulked up guys to play defense, whatever. His profile encourages me a lot because also his teams have improved every year. Obviously, Hurley had some success there, but nothing like the team that Oates put out this year. I'd look for them as a 6th seed to have some success, but obviously, if we focus on tournament results, I think that's a folly. Yeah, and then the other guy is definitely kind of I don't expect this at all to happen, but as some of you may know, I went to grad school at the University of Vermont. And Vermont is a bit of a powerhouse in the America East, at least in the non-conference or the conference schedule. Obviously, getting to the tournament in a low major conference is a bit of a crapshoot because it doesn't matter how well you dominate your conference schedule, you still have to win that conference tournament, which usually is, it's weird. The America East did it a couple of years where they'd have all the games up to the semifinal were on home campuses, and then they would have the championship at a neutral location. But I think they've went away from that now. But the coach, he took over many years ago in 2012 for another coach who Mike Lonergan, who went to what was it, George Washington, if I have that right, and then kind of is most known for being run out for some kind of well, you can read about it, look him up. It's not nice stuff. But John Becker has not had that happen. So one of the things that stands out to me is the America East is not a super good conference. It's definitely higher than, it's definitely better than the MEACs and the SWACs of the world, but not a whole lot better. And most teams range, the good teams typically range, or the better teams in the league typically range around the 150s, and the worst teams are some of the worst teams in college basketball in the 330s and stuff. So but Vermont, and so you don't see a lot of top 100 teams come out of this conference. But under John Becker, the last 3 years, Vermont has went 63rd, 76th, and 80th in the KenPom rankings. They also hit 75th in his third year. So he plays a slow style. They play a motion, ball screen, heavy offense, kind of a very modern offense, which they switched to in like 2014. They had previously ran a different offense, but he made one of the things that's impressive to me is he purposely made changes. So previously Vermont recruited almost exclusively the Northeast, but under Becker they have reached out to Canada, reached out to different parts of the country, the Midwest, and various other, like Louisiana, Arkansas, places like that, to find talent. And Jeff, like you were talking about, you got to have a guy who is willing to go anywhere to find talent. And I think Becker, he changed his recruiting philosophy specifically to do that. And Vermont's actually improved since then. They went from, those 120s, 150s regularly, and now like 3 straight top 100 teams from an America East team is very unusual. Vermont is a threat to upset every year. That's why they're getting 13 seed. They're not a 16 seed. They're a 13 seed this year. But yeah, they one thing that stands out to me, and I mentioned to you, Jeff, I kind of get attracted to any team who's very good at defensive rebounding, because then you automatically know they're playing man to man.
Yep.
And then the fact that, so Vermont actually is second, which this is kind of tempered by the fact that they play in a small conference or whatever, but they're second nationally in offensive rebounding percentage. And they, against the America East this year, they were 88, so they give up 88.5 points per 100 possessions, which is dominant.
Yep.
And then they also scored 110 points per 110 possessions. So they were just dominating their peers. And Vermont is definitely, I would say, like, in terms of resources, they're probably a little bit, there's America East, you have some, you have a lot of like Maine and Albany, which are like state schools, that they're kind of on par with Maine and Albany, New Hampshire in terms of resources. But then you have others that maybe not so much. But I don't see them as the gym is like, so when I was in school there, we'd play pickup ball in the actual gym, and they would just roll the bleachers out for 2 extra. That was their practice court, and then also their home court. So the practice court happened when they roll the bleachers out and push them into the wall like a high school gym. And so it might see, I can give you the exact number of what it seats. It says 3266, but it's packed for that. I went to obviously some games while I was there, and but yeah, obviously they're really into it, because Vermont is almost always a good team relative to their league, and Becker is, I think, taking them to another level consistently. The team this year that's not full of seniors, there's one senior that is kind of one of the main rotation guys, and then you got a lot of sophomores, juniors, freshmen in there. So it's not like he's taken the senior laden team and that's how they're ranked 80th in the country and out of the America East. Like, he's built a program there And so that's what impresses me, that he basically switched his philosophy just from an offensive standpoint and from a recruiting standpoint, and it's paid dividends, and that impresses me. I know it's a small school and not a great conference, but to be able to create teams like that out of that conference, out of Vermont, which is a state of 600,000 people, so it's just an impressive thing to me, and I would totally be fine with Becker being hired. That being said, I think probably Turner is what I'm leaning to from your point of view, but I definitely, if they hired Becker, I wouldn't mind taking that gamble, if you want to call it that.
Heck yeah, that would be great. And to be honest, I think if we take Pat Chun at his word, one of the things he said was basically these guys just need to be better coached. Okay, yeah. So if we take him at his word, okay, then, a guy like Becker is, he's a better coach. And I know that, one of the things that is, I believe is going to happen, as long as Chun makes a sound hire, and, obviously that sort of remains to be seen, because we haven't really seen much. All we've really seen is, the women's coach that he hired for the women's basketball team. So, who knows whether he can actually pull it off or not, whether he can actually sell the program. But, as long as he hires someone competent, things should really get better almost no matter what.
Yeah.
I know that sounds horrible, but that really is true. Ernie Kent did such a poor job with a defense that was ranked around 300th in the Ken Palm adjusted defensive efficiency metric. I think Pat Chun alluded to that in his interview without maybe necessarily saying it, or and I don't even know if he understood kind of what he was saying, but like he mentioned that, hey, with it was WSU put together sort of the second worst record. I think what he said was WSU put together the second worst record of any team with the leading scorer in the Pac-12 or Pac-10 or Pac-8 or whatever.
That's quite a stat.
Which is quite a stat. But I think, what that really speaks to is just how horrendous the defense was, right? Because if you have the leading scorer, that says something sort of about, the points you're able to put on the board, the efficiency with which you're able to do that. And to be honest, WSU wasn't a particularly good offense this year, even with Franks. But what really did them in was the defense was so tremendously terrible. And so I think, I hope that he sort of realizes that, okay, so, when I talk about, we have Franks, we have Ellaby, these two, or we had, Franks and Ellaby, these two really talented players, that the reason why the team was sort of not able to succeed was that the defense was just so unbelievably ungodly awful, that, it really undermined anything that the offensive coach was able to do. And so, I don't know that he necessarily needs to go to a defensive coach. Obviously, you lean that direction a little bit. The natural tendency is to sort of swing back the other direction, when something doesn't work out. I think you see this in sports teams all the time, right? They have an offensive coach, things aren't really working out. Okay, let's swing towards a defensive coach. Or we have a player's coach who's really permissive. Let's swing back towards a disciplinarian. You see this in sports all the time. And so I think it's natural for us to want to swing back that direction with, of course, the context that, the greatest amount of success we've had in the last 15 years is with a defensive minded coach. So, I don't think it necessarily has to go that direction, but I do think they need to play some competent defense. They need to be,
yep.
At the very least, a top 150 team. If that's what you're going to do defensively, then your offense has to be like a top 50 team, kind of like what Utah did this year, right? But even Utah wasn't really sniffing the tournament with what they did. And so, it just really seems like, defense first is really the way to go at WSU, and a coach who's really committed to that. I think that's something Chun said he was looking for, was somebody really committed to an identity and a vision. And so I really hope he kind of lands on maybe the, an identity and a vision that's really defense centered.
Yeah. And to your point, even, we think of Ernie as an offensive focused coach, but he had one top 100 offense in his 5 years at WSU.
First year,
he hit 108 another time, but the other years 187, 171, and 141. adjusted offensive efficiency ranking on KenPom. That is not good. That's
that's
not
also
like
bad.
That's very bad, especially for a Pac-12 team, and just especially from a coach who doesn't even clearly doesn't focus on defense in any way whatsoever. To also have a offense that bad, it's just that's why Jeff has written and we've said we at least need a coach who's got a system instead of just whatever. But yeah, the defensive, because if you take care of the defensive side, that's going to win you some games from just that aspect. And you can with the defensive focused teams, defense is more so than offense. Defense is about dedication and principles, and you can take a guy who's maybe not as talented, but get him to focus and hustle, and you can make a good defensive player. Maybe not a great on-ball defensive player, but if he's playing with a entire team where they have the defensive philosophy in place, you can mask some of those things. While in offense, it's a little harder to do that. So I agree with you, Jeff. Big shock from our listeners to be that we're in agreement on many things. Those are some of our choices for coach. We're going to start hearing more things. I think, Russell Turner is definitely the most legitimate candidate that we've talked about. We were going to talk about the defensive line this week for spring ball preview, but obviously some shit has happened this week. So we're pushing that back till next week. Spring ball starts next week, so we'll ease right into that. We'll talk more about that for you guys, and then obviously there'll be a lot of spring ball for the month after that going forward until we'll be at the spring game and having fun there. So next, Jeff, I would say we usually do a pop culture segment. We're already an hour and 11 deep into this thing. I think the NCAA tournament is pop culture.
Yeah, I would agree. 100% pop culture.
Everyone's mom is filling out a bracket, right? So
yeah, I mean, like at my school, we have our bracket pool, and our bracket pool manager was proposing a change to our scoring system this year, and our secretary, who, if anybody's ever worked in a school, our office manager, the office manager really runs the place. She was having none of it. So yeah, I mean, when your office manager was having none of it, that this is pop culture for sure.
Yep. So before we get started on this, hold on, let me
side piece.
Crack my side. So this week it's usually my side piece is a lager of sorts. I've become, as I've gotten deeper and deeper into this beer nerd game, I've become very fond of well done pilsners and lagers, because that really, there's nothing to hide in these styles, and it's just impressive when a brewer can execute it well. So this is Wayfinder Hell, a Helles lager, really creative name there, but Helles. So a Helles lager style. Compared to a pilsner, Helles lager is going to be a little sweeter. Maybe not as crisp, but not as hoppy. A little more balanced than a pilsner would be. Just a nice beer to come down at the end of the night. It's from Wayfinder. As I mentioned, we went to them this week, and they do a lot of lager styles. I tried a Baltic porter from them, which is actually I know it's called a porter, but it is a lager style. And we can, when we have more time, I'll get into a difference between a lager and an ale later. But which most of you probably know anyway. So I'm drinking a Hell lager from Wayfinder. They do a lot of lager styles. Excellent brewery. Be on the lookout for them. I'd highly recommend. Their tap room is so cool in Portland. Check it out if you're down there. Really cool branding, all that stuff. But I won't belabor that. Jeff, let's. So typically, everyone likes to talk about upsets, and the upsets that people always like to brag about they get are those 12-5s, those 12-5 upsets.
Oh God, yeah.
12-5 upsets happen what, like 40% of the time, or
Yeah, those are for wimps.
yeah, like at 12-5 is like you're like, okay, the 45th best team beat the 25th best team, or 20th best team. Like, is that like crazy? I don't know. Like that's but when you get I think the more impressive, so the 15s and 16s, I mean, I'm not going to dive into trying to predict those because when you get the 15s and 16s, that's when you get the SWAC schools and the MEAC schools. Although you
Right.
did have a MEAC school, Norfolk State, a few years ago, upset, but that's
Yeah,
why
but it's
that upset.
impossible to predict.
It was so
Impossible
extreme.
to predict.
But even these, so even hard, like even still, like, so what we're gonna do is look at the 13 and the 14 lines and offer up some of our best guesses on what is. I'm not saying they're predictions, but like who we think would be most likely to pull an upset, because these are still pretty big upsets. You're talking about teams that range in the 70s to the 120s, beating teams that range in like from 10 to 25 or whatever. So that's definitely an upset. Like if it happened in the regular season, it would be a huge upset. So in the tournament, that's why we freak out about these, because they typically are very big upsets. Because this is when you're starting to see the automatic bids come into play, as in the 13s and the 14s. We do see some of the at-large bids venture into the 13s at times now, but I'm not sure if that happened this year. Looking at who the teams are, I don't think that happened this year. But Jeff, so let's start with the 14 line. Let's start with the bigger upsets. When you're looking at the 14s versus the threes, who do you think would be? Actually, no. Nah, let's go 14. Let's go bigger upset. Let's go 14 versus threes to start. So who are you looking at? You can talk about all the games if you want, but I want to hear who you think is most likely to win that 14 versus 3 matchup.
Yeah, there are a couple that I actually like. I like well, first of all, I don't like Northern Kentucky. That is not one that I would touch with a 20-foot pole. I don't particularly like Georgia State against Houston, mostly because I trust Houston's defense. I do like Old Dominion against Purdue. And that has a lot to do with Old Dominion's defense is legit. Strong 2-point defense. Now Purdue's offense is really built around 3-pointers, so it could be a situation where it really doesn't matter because Purdue's able to score from beyond the arc. But if Purdue has a bad shooting day, they're unlikely probably to find a lot of success inside the arc. So I kind of like Old Dominion, but the big one I really like. This is the one I really like, and this is not like, I think, it's not really an out of the box thing. But Yale over LSU, I think, is a good one. If you're looking for, so if you're in a bracket pool where you get sort of bonus points for upsets, Yale, I think, is a pretty good one to look at. LSU is a fucking disaster right now because their coach is suspended. They crashed out of the SEC tournament after winning the SEC regular season title. They're just a total mess. Now, that might not make a huge difference, except for the fact that Yale's actually pretty good. They're ranked 82nd by KenPom. They actually have a pretty dang good offense. Their defense is pretty suspect, ranked 149th, but their offense is ranked 45th. And the thing they do really, really well is they make twos. And I know that, some of that is, of course, playing against Ivy League teams for 2/3 of their season. But, it's a team that knows how to score. They do really everything well fundamentally. They score really well. They don't turn the ball over a ton. And so they are just a team that's solid, just sort of your typical Ivy League team, right? When you think of, some of you that are my age might remember, Pete Carell's Princeton teams, right? And the big upset against UCLA and all that, whatever that was, 25 years ago now. And so, Yale's kind of very much got that profile. So, if they can execute and LSU gets flustered, I think LSU is ripe for an upset. Not that I necessarily think it will happen, as you mentioned, but I really think Yale's in a good position. If say Northern Kentucky was LSU's 14 seed that they were playing, I might think, they'll probably survive that. But Yale's a pretty good team. They're ranked 82nd overall. That's pretty high for a 14 seed. In fact, I'm trying to remember. I was looking at it earlier, but I think that might actually be higher or really comparable to St. John's, which got in as an 11 seed. So Yale's a pretty good team, and I think that's a pretty good bet if you're looking for a team with value.
I love this because I thought we were just going to be like along the same page and having the same picks, but no, not at all. I do wholeheartedly agree with you on Georgia State, Houston. Houston defends threes really well. Georgia State hucks threes. Obviously, there's a chance for variance in there. I don't see it. Coug fans can cry over Kelvin Sampson having another really good team.
Yeah.
A really good defensive team. Yale, one thing, so Old Dominion, Purdue, I kind of had some of the same. So they both very slow paced teams, defensive oriented teams. That game is going to be ugly. That game is not going to be fun. Like it's going to like whatever. You're going to be like not turning to that channel because it's just going to be ugly because there's going to be 3 other games on. It's just not going to be fun to watch. Purdue, kind of one of their weaknesses I noticed on their defense was the 3-point line, but ODU doesn't really shoot well, and yeah, I just don't see ODU having the offensive talent to overcome, especially because Purdue has a very clear size advantage on the inside, and actually that was my hesitance with Yale. I know Yale has a good offense; they're very fast-paced offense, but they rely. And you talked about the 2-pointers. They rely on that a lot more than a lot of these other small teams do. LSU has 2 6'10", 250 guys. They are pretty good at defending 2-point shots. I think LSU's size advantage might eliminate Yale's primary offensive weapon there. So that wasn't my favorite. And funny enough, the one you poo-pooed right away, Northern Kentucky versus Texas Tech, because I'm talking about when we're looking at these 14 and 3s, I'm looking at a very some high variance thing that could happen. Some crazy high variance thing that could happen, because if these teams are playing each other 100 times, almost all the times, like one of the higher seeds winning 85 to 90% of the time. So that 10 to 15%, some high variance thing has to happen. So Northern Kentucky has 4 very good 3-point shooters, and they shoot a lot of threes, and they shoot them very well. They have a high volume of assists, which means they're not relying on a guy to break down a defense and make his own plays. Tech does have a very good defense and a very good offense. They're the best 3 seed, but they do allow a high volume of threes. Like surprisingly, they I believe they were 277th or 200 and something in that. So if
224th.
224th. I think another team on my 13s was 277. You'll see a trend with me on these picks, but my pick is Northern Kentucky because of those 3-point shooters. I think when you see a lot of these upsets, it's crazy things like that where guys are draining threes all day, and they have 4 guys that shot. I might be mixing my teams. No, they have 4 guys that are very good shooters, which will come up when I talk about my next one. But this is what I'm looking at. Something crazy happening. I think your LSU pick, given the other stuff, is fair, but I think LSU might have the athleticism to lock down what Yale does well. Of course, that Princeton has proved that wrong many times. But Northern Kentucky, Texas Tech, Texas Tech goes down in a barrage of threes, and they honestly don't have. Tech doesn't have a big team, like so they their best player is like 6'6", 190 or whatever. Like it's they don't have a big front line. They do have one 6'10" guy, but you talking about a lot of the other guys in their rotation, 6'3", 6'5", 6'3", 6'3", 6'2". Like they're not going to overpower. Like Jared Culver is very good, but he's also just 6'6", 195. So it's I just don't think that from a size standpoint, they're not overpowering a team like Northern Kentucky. Which, by the way, so I just want to. So I've written about Northern Kentucky in the past. I covered them in their first year, moving over to the Atlantic Sun, and they were just god awful in the Atlantic Sun. And they moved in 2013 was their first year as a Division One. They moved from Division Two to Division One, and they peaked out in the Atlantic Sun as 246, but still got a bid to the Horizon League, but got a move to the Horizon League. 255 that first year. This John Brandon, maybe this is the guy we should be looking at. And then the next 3 years, 138, 90, and 100. So like this is a program that has in 6 years really built itself up quite a bit. Obviously Kentucky's a great state for that. I don't think there is more college basketball fans anywhere else in the world than in Kentucky. Yeah, so I'm looking at Northern Kentucky. Jeff, what are you thinking on the 13s?
Before I get to that, I think that I like what you're saying, because I think, Ken Pomeroy, the proprietor of KenPom.com, he's kind of talked about how, teams that lean offense tend to perform a little bit better in the tournament. And I think that, the explanation seems fairly natural, which is kind of what you said. Like, a defense first team is going to be a little more susceptible to a high variance, event like lots of threes. Basically what did in Virginia, right, last year against UMBC. So I kind of like what you say, because I initially dismissed Northern Kentucky out of hand because I was like, I really like Texas Tech's defense.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But which is dominant. It's the number one ranked defense in adjusted defensive efficiency. But I like your line of thinking that this is a team that Northern Kentucky is a team that shoots really well, shoots a ton of threes, and if they make enough of them, Texas Tech could find themselves sort of in the middle of a fight. So definitely like that. Okay, so my 13 seed, this will come as no surprise to anybody. UC Irvine is a 13 seed. After talking, waxing poetic about Russell Turner for however long I did that, 15 minutes or whatever. So UC Irvine's a 13 seed against Kansas State. They have an approximately 27% chance of winning that game based on results so far this year.
Which is really good for
for a
13-4. Yeah.
Quite good for a 13-4. And that's basically a 1-in-4 chance to win the game. And then again, it kind of gets down to kind of what we were talking about, which is, teams that feature defense, variance gets introduced. UC Irvine's a pretty good 3-point shooting team, not a great 3-point shooting, but a pretty good 3-point shooting team. They don't shoot a ton of them. But Kansas State allows a lot of them. And so if UC Irvine is enticed into taking a bunch of threes, and if they make a bunch, then, Kansas State could really be in trouble. It'll definitely be a slow game featuring two slow-paced teams, like you were talking about with Purdue, two slow-paced teams, two sort of, unlike Purdue, two defense-first teams. But if you're into like kind of hot, sexy defense, like I am, UC Irvine, Kansas State's going to be where it's at, and I will definitely be rooting for UC Irvine. So, and it also might be a great chance to get a first look at your next WSU head coach.
Absolutely. So when I was looking at the 13s, I was actually like there's some teams to be excited about on the 13 line. Like there was no so I would say the least likely to win, and this was obviously they must have obviously this seems like Virginia Tech was very much the top 4 seed, in the minds of the committee, because they got the easiest matchup against St. Louis. Interesting factoid about St. Louis: their top scorer, top leader guy is Tremaine Isabel, who was
Yeah.
at one point a WSU commit, but don't fret too much. He isn't that good, isn't particularly great at anything. Just pretty decent at a lot of stuff. Checks in at 100.50 rating while using 25% of possessions, which is not
Not
that
that
great.
good. No,
Yeah,
that's
so
not that good.
that's below average, honestly. But so to that be your kind of, honestly, they spread it out quite a bit. He's the leader, but they spread when they don't really have a lot of guys that are going to fill it up and be that guy that makes one shiny moment or whatever. So
No. Yeah.
but yeah, so I looked at Vermont. I looked at UC Irvine and Vermont. I think both of Vermont's playing Florida State. I think you'll see a similar game as to Irvine with two defensive-oriented teams. Vermont is not at the level of UC Irvine on defense, but they do. I think that's probably Kempom has it 72-62. I see it kind of falling there. The pace will be a little higher, I think, in the Vermont Florida State game, but it'll be a defensive battle. Yeah, I don't see Vermont again. So going on my trend, my Northern Kentucky trend, Northeastern really stuck out to me. So
Yeah.
Northeastern is 22nd in 3-point attempts per field goal attempt, and they are 13th in 3-point percentage. And they have 4 different guys who took over 143s and shot over 39%. So they can spread you out. And Kansas is actually, they're playing Kansas, who obviously has not been at their best, but they always do well in that fucking Big 12 tournament because it's like in Kansas City. So whatever.
It's also like written in some kind of like law decree that they should be,
But
able to.
they did lose. They did not win the Big 12 this year, regular season, for the first time in 13 years or so.
The streak is dead. Long live the streak.
This is the worst Kansas team in a while.
Yeah.
It's still their 21st in KenPom ranking. They're not bad. And Northeastern's 79, which is actually, that's what I'm saying. There's like some pretty damn good teams on the 13 line this year.
Yep.
These are all automatic bid teams, but they're this could be fun, to watch these games. They may not be wins, but they're probably going to be close games. And so Northeastern given 23% chance to win, 8-point differential. But yeah, Kansas 277th in 3-point attempt for field goal attempts allowed. I put in my notes, all caps, 3-point lottery, exclamation point.
Yep.
So Kansas defense is very good. But they don't defend the threes particularly. They're not bad at it, but they're not great at it.
Yeah.
And they do allow a lot of them. So that again, I'm playing that 3-point lottery. I'm rolling that dice. I'm going 52 black or 42 black, and I'm like, so let's go. And so I'm going with Northeastern. Potentially, we're not saying these are happening. Don't go pick it on your bracket and be like, what the fuck, Craig and Jeff? You said pick Northeastern. You said pick UC Irvine, and they didn't win. These are still the worst. These are still the worst teams in the matchup.
Yeah.
Percentages of them happening are 20 to 25%. So, but yeah. So I think, or 27%. Sorry. Yeah. I like Northeastern. It's also be fun just to watch Kansas go down to Northeastern in the first round. That would be a delight.
Heck.
But yeah, because So this 3-point barrage. Both of my upsets. 3-point lottery. Both of Jeff's upsets. Well, your upset, you go defense first, and the other one offense first. So
yeah.
You're not as narrow-minded as I am.
No, but I like your way of thinking though. I mean, Kansas is ripe for an upset, man. I mean, this is,
Yeah.
Bill Self's been holding that team together with duct tape all year. I mean, it really is like duct tape and chicken wire. It's like, I know that, what they've done this year, like to the naked eye is sort of not a great achievement, right? Like, Kansas is normally, amazing. But they had injuries and Bill Self, I think to hold it together as well as he did, I think is honestly a testament to his coaching. He's built his defense inside out. And Northeastern's just like, fuck it, we don't care. like we're just gonna shoot half our shots from three, and whatever. So
Yep.
it definitely could be a situation where that inside out, Kansas defense, where they are so protective of the rim, comes back to bite them. And Kansas is definitely I don't know this for sure because I'm not looking at results right now, but my anecdotal recollection is that Kansas has been fairly susceptible to upsets over the years, and this seems like as good a one as any. So, yeah, I like that pick. I like that pick a lot.
All right. So Jeff, we are, man. But I think do you have any kid anecdotes?
Man,
Out there?
I got nothing this week. I've been so focused on basketball and Ernie Kent and why he sucks and all that kind of stuff that I really I got to admit I have not been paying enough attention to my children.
So I've obviously talked about B. I talked about B up top, but I will say I've talked about the toothbrushing, singing in previous episodes. We've now changed the song because us singing is not enough to distract her from the torture of us brushing her teeth. Now there's an Elmo song, a toothbrushing song, which I'd highly recommend to look up. It's kind of a hip hoppy, poppy brushing song, and B loves it, and that's made brushing quite a bit easier. But now I have it stuck in my head all the time, which is great. So I have Elmo's voice stuck in my head constantly. But yeah, so that's my week in parenting. But she's been a real trooper. We had a lot of nights where we were doing social activities and she had to stay up way past her bedtime. And she is just the sweetest, most outgoing person, which is nothing like her parents. So we're interested to see if she's actually going to be an extrovert, which will totally shock.
That would be so perfect. That would be so perfect.
Yeah, exactly. She's like forcing us to talk to people we don't want to talk to. Even our neighbor came over to the fence today, because it was nice. We were outside, and B was the first one over there to greet him. And we're like, oh, talking to our neighbor, what a weird thing.
Who does that?
Yeah, our longest interaction with him, he came over and knocked on our door. He had recently divorced, and they were valuing their assets. And since he's our next door neighbor on the same street, so he basically he asked us, how much we bought the house for, and because we had bought it recently, and then he wanted to just kind of take a look to see how it compared to his house and all that stuff, so he could assess his own home for that divorce value.
I'll bet that wasn't weird.
Yeah, well, he's a nice guy, so we had talked to him before, so it wasn't. But it's kind of weird to be like tell someone exactly, you're fine, like this is what we spent on the house and all that stuff, and it's like, well, if Amanda and I, we're not the cleanest of folk, so when someone comes over and just on a whim,
right?
We kind of freak out, like we're like, oh, there's underwear all over the place, so good luck with that. But yeah, so man, that was we talked about sports for the entire podcast, and beer. Actually, that was probably our most talk about beer, but because beer is great, and
beer is great,
and I'm almost done with the second one, and I'm feeling good, and I'm feeling like this was a good podcast.
I agree.
So you're welcome for all the people that listened.
Right.
Also, if you enjoyed it, please give us a subscribe on your on whatever app you listen on. I know a lot of you listen just on Coug Center because I can tell who listens in the browser, but a growing number of you are listening on podcast apps, so please hit subscribe on that, and then you'll get it just delivered straight to you, and you don't have to go hunt the Coug Center article. Give us a follow on our Twitter and engage with us at Pod versus Everyone. That's PODVS Everyone on Twitter. Shoot us questions on there. Give us suggestions on how we should rate our beers. Otherwise, we're just going to keep making up ones every time. But we'd happy to answer your questions, happy to do anything. I'd love if we got just a bunch of questions. We could do a mailbag episode, so we had to do like very little preparation whatsoever. Because when summer comes, we're not going to have anything to talk about. So please send us some questions for the summer, so we can do that. But yeah, so give us a follow, give us a subscribe, give us a like, and thanks.
Goodbye.